This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And this week he's taking a look at the weaponry from the grim dark future of the 41st millennium in Warhammer 40k Darktide.
This is a real closest we've got so far to a bolter in terms of this idea of rocket ammunition. Fascinating area of technology. This is a sort of highly stylized, idealized version of it.
Make sure to subscribe and check out our previous episode on the weapons of Warhammer 40k when Jonathan took a look at the guns from Necromunda. And if you like this kind of content, we've got a brand new season of Loadout airing on the channel right now. New episodes will launch every Sunday, and you can already check out our previous episode on the Scar. Right, let's take a look at the weapons of Darktide.
First impressions, very good. This looks like a functional, believable firearm, albeit a bit chunky and bulky for what it's firing, which appears to be conventional brass-cased centre-fire ammunition. Otherwise, we've got proper controls. We've got a left-hand charging handle, a proper magazine catch. A game like this would typically just have the player rip the magazine out of the gun magically and shove in another one. But this has a thumb catch on the left side for you to operate. Now, the aiming of this does not let you use the sights by the look of it. This is much more like an old-school FPS rifle where it just maybe zooms your view in a bit and reduces your dispersion, but you're not aiming, you're not ADSing. Design-wise, it's hard to deny that it doesn't resemble an AK, or maybe more like a Saiga sporting rifle with that left-hand charging handle, or a Saiga shotgun even with how bulky the magazine is. But it's spitting out sort of elongated 5.56 adjacent cartridge cases. Again, I'm not sure why in the future you would want a longer case. I would expect, if we're still using, for some bizarre reason, conventional ammunition, that the propellant would be uber efficient and the cartridges could be really, really small. I would probably call this a machine pistol rather than a submachine gun, not just because it's compact, but because it does not have a shoulder stock, or indeed, I think, provision for it. The design of this thing really does look suitably Warhammer. What I'm noticing here is obviously the Warhammer series goes back into the 1980s, 40k specifically, and so you have a sci-fi aesthetic rooted in that era, and so you wouldn't have any Picatinny rails. You wouldn't have little sort of learned details like the magazine catch that also has a handy shroud around it of that style. That looks to be a lift from the FN Scar or a similar modern rifle. And it's on the auto rifle. It's on this SMG as well. So little details like that where I suppose they're sort of like they're retcons, very, very minor retcons. But the original weapons from the first couple of decades of this franchise, needless to say, wouldn't have had those features of modern firearms. Now they haven't gone wild. They haven't made this stuff look like Call of Duty, which is great. Point is, a lot of these things are going to be designed to look cool and interesting, but then we do have these little hints of the present day, notably the Picatinny rail attachment system, which isn't just cosmetic, of course, it's part of the gameplay, and I'm absolutely certain that I'm going to see some optical sights as well. Flamethrower, flamer, whatever you want to call it, incinerator unit. Definitely something I associate with this universe. It's hard to give a flame projector presence because there are no working parts, there's no case ejection, the muzzle flash is literally the whole event here. That in itself is pretty impressive, but importantly, the way if the flame reaches a surface, it sticks and it burns. That's the critical thing. The big deal is this is thickened fuel that you are squirting at high pressure that happens to be on fire. So it doesn't just create heat damage and then stop creating heat damage, it continues to burn. And we see that to great effect with the enemies. Two main methods of use for this thing as well. And because of that burning effect, kind of want to share the love a bit and give short bursts to a number of weaker enemies, and then focus your main burst of fire onto the bigger ones, or something of that nature. Well, this appears to have automated that process. So you've got the ability to deliberately squirt short bursts and then to give it the full blast when you need to. That might have a relevance in terms of not the spool up time, but typically a game flame gun will take a little while to start spraying that flame, which is actually realistic. That's how it should work. And so if it has an automated short dash version of its own fire, if that makes sense, then you can effectively do that. Whereas if you're trying to like preempt and hold the fire button and let it off to only get a short burst, that could potentially be frustrating. So that's my take. I think they've tried to move things on a little bit with the flamethrower. This time I thought I'd show you, well, a couple of things. This is the number 5 Mark 1 British flamethrower projector, which is what the Brits called it. It's the gun bit of the flamethrower. Really, all this is doing is directing where the jet of burning fuel goes. The business end really is the bit that's missing. We don't have the backpack for this, unfortunately. Now, the other flamethrower that I wanted to show you is not a flamethrower. Literally, it says on the box, we have the box too, and it says not a flamethrower. This was literally a weed burning gun that you can buy in Lidl, housed in a sci-fi airsoft gun casing. You can even see where the magazine would have gone for the airsoft gun. So it kind of looks the part as a pop culture sci-fi flamethrower, albeit it looks a bit too clean and Mass Effect-y for 40k. An interesting bit of arms and armor culture that we thought we should preserve, even if it's not a flamethrower. This thing is a lot of fun. This is a semi-automatic grenade launcher of some kind that is, I think it's described as a gauntlet, and that sort of fits in that it's some of the receiver wraps around the hand. You can see this, you don't need me to tell you that, which allows it to be used, and I guess where the gauntlet part really comes in, it can be used by these massive dudes as a melee weapon. He's certainly firing it with both hands when he's actually firing it as a grenade launcher, but then when he goes to town and clobbers people, it's just a one-handed weapon. Behaves, I would say, and even sounds a lot like something like an M32. Any repeating grenade launcher has that bloop sound, and that's somewhat realistic. You can see that it has an arcing trajectory, but it's quite flat, so you're not having to artificially compensate for drop. Effect on target is very much, this has to be some sort of high explosive. Even then, it's got a bit too much Hollywood fireball if it were meant to be a realistic thing. It isn't, so we want fireball. There's quite a cool smoke after effect after the flame, which is realistic. If it did contain some kind of incendiary capability like that, you would see some smoke come off it. Right, so I'm on more familiar ground with this thing, because even I know about bolt guns or bolters. This has got to be a little diddy one for normal human-sized people. So I'm getting from the information on the screen, in fact, that you get automatic fire when hit-fired and semi-automatic when aimed. Now, of course, this thing doesn't have a buttstock, unless it's modifiable to have one. And from memory, I don't remember bolters even having one. I guess the idea with the Space Marine, at least in my head, would be that he'd be able to hold this thing rock solid steady without having a buttstock. Not the case for ordinary people. But then if you put a buttstock on it, it doesn't really have the classic silhouette. This is a real closest we've got so far to a bolter in terms of this idea of rocket ammunition. It's very, very basic. It's a die-cast metal body with a simple steel tube set into that, and a rear-acting hammer that fires backward onto the nose of the round. It's not really a cartridge because it's a self-contained round. So the nose doesn't actually do anything, but that pushes it back onto the primer. It does have a center fire primer buried in here, you won't be able to see, that then fires the round, and then there are 4 base exhaust holes, and that's the exhaust that propels the round. That it's not the explosion inside that's pushing the projectile, It's launching itself. It's literally a miniature rocket. So it accelerates over the hammer, recocking it. Another round comes up behind it, ready for firing. The tube is just a guide to get it on its way. It's the rotational stability of the rocket projectile that keeps it stable. Fascinating area of technology. This is a sort of highly stylized, idealized version of it.
We are in a cog!
Okay, so taking a keen interest in the ammunition here, looking at the magazine, we can see it's double stack. It's very large, but then the projectiles are very large themselves, or rockets, missiles, munitions, effectively. You can see that it has a centerfire primer, something going on at the front that we don't have on the gyrojet round that is clearly whatever's containing the payload that blows people to shreds, which is very impressive and very cool. So it's interesting. Just all my rambling about how this would actually work in reality. It's almost like calling them rockets is more like emphasis for their explosive capability. They're more like grenades. They're not really meaningfully rockets in the way that the gyrojet is. I don't think. You know, they don't fly in any way slowly. They're not accelerating from the muzzle like a rocket would. They're firing like a miniature grenade round, and they behave like a miniature grenade round.
78. The body dies.
We move outside my area of expertise with directed energy weapons, especially ones that are made up. There's no particular reason why an energy weapon, a laser weapon, would require to look quite so much like a conventional firearm, with the magazine where the magazine would normally be, shaped much like it would normally be. The thing that draws my attention is the sight. I like the fact that it's quite busy with switches and dials and what looks like some conduit or something on the right-hand side. It separates it a bit from the generic Call of Duty modern day red dot sight. It's a little amusing that it has the what's known as the donut of death reticle from the EOTech, with the circle with the 4 hash marks and the dot in the middle. Hey, if it works, keep it for 40,000 years. But the thing that's cool about this for me is the Gothic arch / church window shape of the thing. Great way to blend it in with this world. All right, so the impression here is, for me, as a filthy casual Warhammer person, is a bit Gears of War. But then I know as soon as I say that Gears of War is the thing that owes the debt to Warhammer and not the other way around. But yeah, different design aesthetic, but absolutely fits with the Bolter's design aesthetic. Caring less about ergonomics. Chunky, it's blocky, it's got screws or rivets all over it. Lots of big, easy to grasp controls. A stylized, pretty brutal looking bayonet. Not sure if that's where Ripper comes from or if it's because of how it burst fires. So the description's telling me it's going to be burst and fully automatic, and that the bayonet's functional. So that's going to be interesting. Okay, I'm a bit slow on the uptake with this one, but it's clearly an automatic shotgun. The huge cartridge case is coming flying out the top of the gun. The bolt thing, it has a functional bolt on top. It reminds me of, and I forget which one it is, there's a riot gun, effectively, less lethal riot gun, that somebody actually posted online saying, real life 40k bolter. The way it works is very reminiscent, where you can see a lot of the action as it opens up, and it's a slow chugging rate of fire. That's designed for riot control. This is, I guess, potentially used for that, but with a bayonet on the front, probably not. It's just a short, stubby, very chunky auto shotgun with a bayonet on the front. Bayonets on shotguns, of course, rare but not unheard of. The 1897 trench gun had a bayonet. As to how the bayonet functions, it's such a short gun that he's just having to just push it out in front of him. Bayonet fighting with modern firearms is very much a last-ditch, a psychological weapon. Here, it's a key function of how the weapon works. All right, first impressions. This is looking very familiar to me. I don't know if it's because I've seen it in something Warhammer or if it just looks like something else. So the front half is highly stylized, very blocky, very Warhammer. Even the pump grip, which you can discern, fits that very well. What kind of gives it away fully as a shotgun is the buttstock, which is a very traditional semi-pistol grip shotgun buttstock. It does have a rib across the top, which is a feature of shotgun barrels, but here the rib extends all the way across over the body as well.
I'm reloading! It's down!
In use then, this thing is very shotgunny, pretty conventional in terms of its effect. There's only so much you can do with an FPS shotgun. The way it operates is nice though. What's remarkable, I think, is the alt fire here, where we're taking advantage of the ability of a shotgun to fire different rounds. It's very rare that games do model that. Some of the more realistic ones do that, but for a sci-fi game, pretty interesting that they've leveraged a real capability of a shotgun. They have somewhat justified the existence of a manual pump on this thing. Something that I do occasionally whinge about is, why would you have a pump action on a future shotgun when we have self-loading shotguns already? They're making use of it here to let you alt fire by inserting the special round. Now, a lesser game would have you just pull the trigger and you get that secondary effect. They are here having the player character manually cycle that special round into the gun, because by loading it, you've only loaded it. You haven't cycled it into the chamber. So if you just pull the trigger, you'd get that ordinary shot first, and then with the self-loading ability, then you'd get your special shot. The actual effect being shown, again, is a real effect, that the spreading of shot at a certain height, that's achieved with, well, either a highly specialized choke at the end of the gun or an actual external duckbill nozzle attachment. It can't make it spread wider like this is. It can only constrain the top of the shot pattern. So a duckbill attachment turns a pattern like this into a pattern like this. This gun turns a pattern like, say, this into a pattern like this. Based in a real thing, exaggerated, and made to happen through ammunition, which isn't a thing. And I'm not sure how it would be a thing, but answers on the usual virtual postcard.
This one's for Cadia.
No need for fancy.
Neutralize the Rager!
Okay, another Lasgun, very reminiscent of the ordinary one in the game, but with different barrel, an oddly old-fashioned looking wooden shotgun style buttstock with a exaggerated metal butt plate. So the core system seems to be the same as what I've seen. The other thing I noticed is the gameplay ability to charge up a shot with the little meters there. That would seem to tie in with the massive radiator on the barrel of this thing, which is very much like the old 1914 French Hotchkiss gun. If you look up a picture of that, has a gigantic radiator in approximately the same place on the barrel. Possibly even an inspiration for them, I don't know. If this is a laser weapon you can charge up that has to contain heat, then a radiator on the barrel makes sense. Makes it look different. Now the bayonet and that shotgun style buttstock give this thing a real... This thing reminds you of the 1897, the Winchester 1897 trench gun from the First World War. Admittedly, you don't get the pump capability, and it has that green, angular, futuristic look that a lot of the weapons in this game do, but it's sort of topped and tailed with bayonet, shotgun buttstock. The overall length is very reminiscent of that as well. Okay, I think some credit deserved here for making a video game revolver that really looks different. You can tell it's a revolver from, well, I guess the grip shape and the cylinder, but they've tried to change up a lot of this thing, so it's not just yet another Magnum. We've got a bit of detail. There is a hammer. There are cylinder stop notches in the cylinder, which is how this thing works. Although the trigger is not capable of double action fire. Now, based on the description, semi-automatic, technically a revolver cannot be, well, it can be, before people correct me in the comments, but the vast majority of revolvers are not semi-automatic. They just fire at one shot per pull of the trigger because you're pulling the trigger all the way back. There isn't enough travel, there isn't enough trigger length here for this to be anything other than single action. But needless to say, I will let them off. Something about that circular trigger guard / trigger housing and the flatness of this frame is reminding me of something. I think I'm thinking of, and goodness knows if this is an inspiration or not, but given that a version appeared in The Mandalorian, maybe, the Bergman semi-automatic pistols have that style of circular trigger guard. It's a reach, but that's where my brain was going. Let's see how this thing operates. In operation, this is reminding me of big, smooth cylinder, very large rounds, only 5 fitting in the cylinder. Got to be something like a Smith & Wesson 500. But it's honestly, this is its own thing. The reload is, there's some thought gone into it, more thought than necessary, frankly, for a game of this nature. Break action. Needless to say, there's an attempt to hold in the unfired rounds with the thumb, which is not very efficient, but would work, and they've bothered to try, which is nice. It appears to have an ejector star in the center of the cylinder that doesn't get used, and there's some kind of a rod up front under the barrel that I thought was going to come into play. So maybe the user is just ignoring that and using gravity. The rear sight is a bit curious. It has 2 big adjustment knobs on it for unknown purposes. That would tend to be for some sort of elevation and windage adjustment. You wouldn't need both if it was just one. This clearly isn't a target revolver, so I don't really know why those are there. Whoa, this thing is a bit left field. There are those conventional rounds again, which I'm not a fan of in far future sci-fi, I'm sorry. Belted, linked rounds. This is a belt-fed gun. I'm not seeing how those rounds get diverted into what is apparently an upper and a lower barrel. The barrels have very chunky heat shields on them that bring to mind a number of designs. I suppose the Browning M2 is the one that's going to leap to mind, especially as this is called heavy. I've got no sense of scale, but I think given the rounds, they're probably going to be 50 cal or equivalent. In fact, they look a lot like 50 BMG. Although from a profile view, you can only see the one belt, and I'm thinking, they fudged it. They're just diverting rounds up and some down. No, this is actually reminiscent of a couple of our anti-aircraft mounts that we have in the collection here at the Royal Armouries, where you have, well, the one I'm thinking of is 4 guns, and you have feed chutes running from belt boxes side by side at different heights into the different guns. Basically, exactly like this, because this is 2 guns that happen to be screwed together by the look of it. Operated off one trigger, of course. They're offset, they're displaced fore and aft, but that makes sense because the feed region of the gun has to align with the belt. So to actually offset the top one to the rear does actually make some sense. So what looked like a pretty wacky, silly design, actually, for somebody who has a tremendous amount of strength, is starting to make some sense, which is funny. All right, so our twin fire modes here are pretty intriguing, actually. It's akin to deploying a bipod in a more realistic FPS. So we're getting a reduced dispersion when we flip out the handle and brace the thing more deliberately, which is logical. I have noticed something that detracts somewhat from the realism, as if we care about the realism, but the cocking handle on the top, yeah, okay, that's accessible for the gun on the top. How are we cocking the gun on the bottom? I imagine it's a case of the cocking handle would go straight through the bolt of the top gun and be physically attached to the bolt of the bottom gun in a different location, and sheer brute strength means you can cock them both from one charging handle. That's what I'm going with. All right, this is very unusual. Of all the guns we've looked at, I think it's safe to say this is the only one that is based on a real gun. This is a Warhammer M79. Now, although the sight doesn't get used, this clamped on sight arrangement is almost identical. It's on the same place on the barrel, although I suppose that's dictated by the sight ladder. The real thing, you press this catch and this thing is deployable. In the game, it just kind of sits there looking cool and flapping up and down. But yeah, it's remarkably similar. From here forward, almost identical. It looks like they've replaced some of the wood. They have studied an M79 to create this weapon. If we open it up, you can see, but the rifling in the barrel is evident on the video game version as well. What can I say? It's an M79 in space. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed our review of the guns of Warhammer Darktide. The more I see of that game, the more I want to play it. As always, we at the Royal Armouries would love you to come and visit one of our physical museums. If you can't, we have our own YouTube channel that you're very welcome to come over and take a look at as well. Not just me on there, there is a fair bit of me. We've also got social media, of course, you can check out, and some events going on in the new year as well. All right, guys, take care.